Known to let that Mac fly just like my nigga dope.
I'ma let this Mac fly with this one. Hold on. I say I'ma let it. Alright, come on. Alright. Got a drop on this flexin' nigga. He from Tennessee. I had a thought.
What's good, l.r.h. gang? Gusto in this thing, and today we got a reaction video, you know what I'm saying? This is They Will Kill You, the YouTube channel, that's what it's called. But the title today of this video is When Canada Goes Wrong, you know what I'm saying? I really don't know. They say that there's a lot of violence in Toronto and shit like that, but I really ain't. I feel like Canada is pretty safe for the most part, so I'm gonna jump into this, see what's going on, you feel me? I'm gonna find out the description and the link, you know what I'm saying? So go check them out. Let's go.
Number 9, Jordan Carberry.
Turn the volume up real quick.
In July of 2018, Canadian park ranger Jordan Carberry was the victim of a gruesome grizzly bear attack that nearly ended his life. The man had returned to his home in Bella, British Columbia, after a week-long trip. The 49-year-old went out with his camera, but didn't know that
should be more worried about getting attacked by a grizzly bear or something than actually somebody out there trying to do something to you, feel me?
The fruits of a cherry tree near his yard had ripened. It was there that Carberry encountered a massive sow and her cub. The smaller bear fell from the tree, and the sound of the snapping branch startled the mother. It charged Carberry, and with a swipe of its paw, sent the man flying. The animal then bit into his skull and abdomen. Carberry repeatedly kicked it in the eyes and snout, until he was able to gain enough distance to get back inside the house. The bear had scalped him, severed half an ear, and inflicted severe injuries to his torso. Holding onto his gut, the man rushed to his car, narrowly avoiding a second charge by the sow. Blood was streaming into his eyes, but Carberry managed to drive himself to a local clinic, from where he was transferred to Vancouver General Hospital. He was rushed into surgery, and after a 14-day stay, was cleared to return to his home. Today's featured fan shout-out is Instagram follower @DevilsDomain. To appear in our next video, send us your pic rocking the latest merch from theywillkillyou.com and send it into us on Instagram
and then
today.
Getting featured on this video.
Number 8, Great Maple Syrup Heist. When adjusted for inflation, the Great Maple Syrup Heist, which took place from 2011 to 2012, is the most valuable heist in Canadian history over the course of several months. The contents of nearly 10,000 barrels were stolen from a facility in Quebec, operated by the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers. The private group has a monopoly on the global market, accounting for 77% of the total supply. The unmarked metal barrels at the facility were only inspected about once a year. Thieves would initially transport them to a different location, siphon the syrup, and replace the contents of the 600-pound barrels with water. Before long, they stole it directly from the reserve without refilling the containers. The syrup was then sold to various distributors who operated legally and were unaware of its origins. When an inspector arrived at the Quebec facility for the annual review, he climbed in the barrels, expecting them to be full, and nearly fell over. The investigation that followed led to the arrest of 17 people. A man named Richard Valares was identified as the ringleader and sentenced to 8 years in prison in April of 2017. He and his accomplices had stolen an estimated 3,000 tons of maple syrup at a value of nearly $15 million. Number 7, Karla Homolka. Between 1990 and 1992, Canadian woman Karla Homolka and her first husband, Paul Bernardo, drugged, tortured, and killed at least 3 teenage girls. One of the victims was Homolka's younger sister, Tammy. The couple, who the media dubbed the Ken and Barbie Killers, were arrested in 1993. Homolka alleged that she was under Bernardo's control and that he'd forced her to commit the murders. The prosecution struck a deal with the woman, then in her early 20s. Her charges were dropped to manslaughter, and she was given a sentence of 12 years. The plea bargain gained worldwide media attention, and the Canadian press would subsequently refer to it as a deal with the devil. The argument was that Homolka had evaded punishment by helping the prosecution secure a life conviction against Bernardo. Later videotapes of the crimes emerged, showing that the woman had been much more active in committing them than she'd initially claimed. Even though the tapes would have likely resulted in a murder conviction for Homolka, Initial deal was upheld. She was released in 2005. Amolka married her lawyer's brother, had 3 children, and eventually settled in the province of Quebec. Judging by the gruesome nature of the murder, Amolka's active participation,
It's crazy how these niggas be going. Like, they'll literally kill people, you feel me? And then go start a whole different life, bro. Like, this woman had killed her daughter or whatever. And then I had seen her Instagram, you feel me? Like, I don't know, I had seen a post, probably on DJ Academics or some shit like that on Instagram or something. And then I see her account. She has a whole husband, bro. She lives in Arizona, the same state I live in, you feel me? She out doing a whole different thing, nigga, just not acknowledging that she killed her daughter like 20 years before, nigga. Like, it's crazy how this shit worked.
relatively short sentence and release. The case was regarded by many as a failure of the Canadian legal system. Number 6. Flying bear accident. In 2011, 2 Canadians were instantly killed in a freak accident involving a flying black bear. It occurred roughly 25 miles north of Ottawa. The 440-pound beast was struck by a vehicle and launched into the windshield of an oncoming SUV. The driver, a woman in her mid-20s, was struck by the bear's body. It also hit the 40-year-old man sitting behind her before shooting out the back window. The bear and both of the SUV's occupants died as a result of the collision, the circumstances of which were later described by a police spokesperson as really rare. Number 5.
Directly behind
Beer bandit.
And there was 2 people in there, bro.
In 2005, a Canadian truck driver was convicted of stealing a truckload of beer. Wade Haynes claimed that he'd abandoned the vehicle because he was angry at his employer and because he'd also gotten into an argument with his girlfriend. The 31-year-old told the authorities that he simply needed to get away, which is why he'd hitchhiked to Quebec. The load, approximately 54,000 cans of Moosehead Lager, then mysteriously vanished. Most of the beer was never found again. Haynes was arrested but stated that he'd only learned about the heist several days after it had already occurred. However, according to his girlfriend, he wanted to deposit $2,000 into her bank account in the aftermath. He'd also sent her a birthday card for mail with a handwritten note signed, "Copyright, the Canadian Beer Bandit." Most of the evidence was circumstantial, but the woman's testimony swayed the jury, and Haynes was sentenced to 19 months in jail. Number 4. Snowmobile accident. In January of 2015, a Canadian man lost his life after striking a moose with his snowmobile. The unnamed 55-year-old was riding the vehicle on a marked trail in Saint Joseph de Kamoruska, about 250 miles northeast of Montreal. 2 witnesses reported that the driver struck the moose at full force, with his head taking the brunt of the impact. According to their testimonies, the devastating injuries occurred as the man passed underneath the beast. He was later pronounced dead in a hospital. The collision had occurred at about 10:15 p.m. The police concluded that speed and limited visibility had been major contributing factors to the accident. Officers found tracks leading away from the site, suggesting that the moose hadn't been severely hurt in the accident.
Shit wanna fuck with that moose, bro.
Number 3. Mark Twitchell.
I wanna see what shit's real life.
In an attempt to emulate the fictional serial killer Dexter from the eponymous TV series, Mark Twitchell lured victims to a garage in Edmonton via the online dating site Plenty of Fish. He first attacked a man named Giles Tetrol, whom the media would later nickname as the one who got away. Tetrol arrived at the garage, expecting to meet a woman named Sheena. Twitchell emerged, wearing a hockey mask, and charged him with a stun baton. A violent struggle ensued, and Tetrol managed to escape, but he didn't report the incident to the authorities out of embarrassment. Twitchell used the same strategy in luring 38-year-old Brian Altinger. The man's friends became worried after they received messages from him, claiming that his date had taken him on a long vacation to Costa Rica. After breaking into his home, they found no indication that he'd left the city. Edmonton police launched an investigation which led them to Twitchell, whom they arrested on October the 31st of 2008. The central piece of evidence at his trial was a document found on his laptop, titled SK Confession, with the SK standing for serial killer. The document chronicled a person's metamorphosis into a serial killer. It detailed planning, the fake dating site profiles being used as bait, a failed first attempt, and dismembering the remains of a victim. Twitchell eventually admitted to killing Altinger and was sentenced to life in prison. After being convicted of first-degree murder, in 2013 it was reported that he'd bought a TV for his cell so that he could catch up on the Dexter episodes he'd missed since he was arrested. Today's topic was requested by Dream But Bad. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Beaver attacks snorkel. In September of 2014, Halifax man Jeremy McNaughton became the victim of a vicious beaver attack. 23-year-old McNaughton and a few of his friends were snorkeling in Spanish Ship Bay, near Sherbrooke. They noticed an animal of generous proportions approaching them, and at first, they thought it was a seal. However, upon noticing the reddish fur, paddle-like tail, and the distinctive bug teeth, they knew that it was a beaver. The animal charged McNaughton and plunged its teeth deep into the man's thigh. He'd initially felt no pain, but as blood started to float around him, the man knew he'd been bitten. When he got out of the water, McNaughton saw a 2-inch gash in his leg. He was taken to the hospital and treated with a tetanus shot and a preemptive round of a rabies vaccine. Number 1. Nova Scotia rampage. In 2020, Gabriel Wortman was responsible for the deadliest crime spree in Canadian history. It started in the rural beachside community of Portapique, Nova Scotia, on April the 18th. 51-year-old Wortman had gotten into a fight with his common-law wife at a party. Once they returned home, he handcuffed her inside their home and set it on fire. The woman managed to free herself and escaped into the nearby woods, but Wortman's murderous rampage had just begun. He donned a police uniform and got into the unregistered police vehicle replica that he owned. After filling it with firearms and ammunition, he returned to the party and gunned down 7 people. Wortman would claim 7 more lives in Portapique and set several homes on fire before leaving through a dirt road along a blueberry field. By the early hours of April the 19th, warning bulletins were circulated to police all across Nova Scotia. Wortman continued his killing spree in Debert, Wentworth Valley, and Shubenacadie. He executed people at their residences, shot a woman on the side of the road, and killed a police officer in a fire exchange. He then stole an SUV after fatally shooting its driver. Roughly 13 hours after law enforcement had started pursuing him, Wortman stopped at a gas station in Enfield. 2 Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers were already at the station. Seeing that he'd been recognized, Wortman tried to raise a handgun. He was fatally shot by the officers, and his rampage was brought to an end after he'd killed 22 people and injured 3 others.
Yesterday, we were jolted from that common cause by the senseless violence and tragedy in Nova Scotia. A gunman claimed the lives of at least 18 people. Among them, a woman in uniform, whose job it is to protect lives even if it endangers her own. Constable Heidi Stevenson of the RCMP. This happened in small towns: Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield. This day is made all the more difficult because of the precious lives lost and the senseless act of one person. Just how could this happen? We may never know why. I want to ask the media to avoid mentioning the name and showing the picture of the person involved. Do not give him the gift of infamy. Let us instead focus all our intention and attention on the lives we lost and the families and friends who grieve.
Thanks for watching.
But that's the end, you feel me? As you can see, there ain't too much to worry about in Canada, but don't underestimate shit, because you can get touched anywhere, you feel me? This is They Will Kill You. I'm gonna have this shit in the description. Go check them out. We out this thing. What up, y'all?